office advocates for individuals with special needs across their lifespan. So that includes advocating for special education and related services, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. We do SSI and Medicaid. We also advocate for adult services, and we do guardianships and estate planning, all for individuals with special needs. We like to say we discriminate against the neurotypically developing population because you have to have a child with special needs in order to be a client of our firm. Okay. So everybody can see me okay, right? You can't see me behind the podium. I'm vertically challenged. So I just want to first start out with I am very sarcastic. I am not good at not being sarcastic, so I apologize in advance for that. I will try to do my best to control it, but I am just simply sarcastic by nature. But anyway, so I got into this field because I have a brother with autism. He is 49 years old. Cognitively, he's about a 2-year-old as far as we know. So I've been involved in his life and advocating for him throughout his life. And then there came a point where I opened up my law firm 16 years ago, and we've been advocating for individuals with special needs ever since. Okay, so if you have any questions along the way, please stop, ask. I just want to make sure that if you have access to the microphone, that would be helpful because we are videotaping this. So this way, people who listen to this recording afterwards, it will be posted on Facebook, on the Facebook page, and I believe it's going to be connected to YouTube as well. It's going to be connected to YouTube as well. But I just wanted to make sure that everybody has access to the questions that you're asking as well. Okay? So we're going to get started, and we're going to be talking about how to advocate for students with special needs. And the agenda really is lots of scary stuff. Okay? I'm going to go into more detail about how I mentioned before. How kids with disabilities are not treated equally. You know that, but I'm going to explain. I'm going to give you advocacy efforts along the way. It was especially pronounced that kids with disabilities are not being treated equally during the COVID pandemic. I'm not implying that the COVID pandemic is over in any way, but it highlighted for everybody how students with special needs are not getting access to the same material and the same instruction that the neurotypically developing population is getting. The schools are not set up so they can be treated equally. That's another big problem. Again, I probably don't need to share this with you. You probably already know it, but I'm just establishing the foundation for moving forward, okay? And the other problem is that it's not a problem, it's also a benefit. We have a lot of work to do, and throughout today's presentation and moving forward, we're going to be seeking your help. Okay, so together we're going with the Legal Aid Society. We're going to be working together to train you as parents to become advocates and understand how to advocate for your child with special needs. Okay, I will be involved with the Legal Aid Society. I'll be working with them, tag teaming to help parents. The more, the better. If as a parent you want to become more involved as an advocate, we will train you professionally on how to do that. Okay, I invite you to do this. We have a major problem in this area. We have a major problem across the country, and we don't have enough advocates to support that. So I'm inviting you as parents, as professionals, to help get into the field, and we will provide the training to help you get to that point. Okay. So, what families are told? You go to your child is struggling in school. And you bring this to the attention of the teachers, okay, or the districts, and they say behaviors are not and they're in the home, they're not in school. We don't see the behaviors in school, okay. We also hear your grades are fine. We also hear that it's a medical issue, okay. It's not educational. Major problem. You go into a meeting if your child is already classified. You go into a meeting and you hear, "We love your child." Okay, they're really making a lot of effort, and they're highlighting, which is a good thing to do. They're focusing on strengths, but they're not. There might be advancing the challenges that the student is having in between all of the strengths. So it can easily be hidden, and then the parents don't know that the needs are actually present. Okay. You also hear, well, your child isn't paying attention. You heard Tracy talk about that earlier. Your child isn't paying attention, so that's why they're not making progress. You hear that not all children mature at the same rate. I've also heard, which I did not add to this, well, your child has a disability, so what do you expect? I remained very calm in response to that. Don't fret. I'm joking. I definitely did not. I think I turned pale, and that I'll let you think about what happened after that. You'll hear that your child is reading at grade level. Okay, they might be understanding it at grade level, I will say, but they might not be reading at grade level. Those are two different distinctions that if you're not in the field, you might not be able to pick up on, or you might not pick up on. And they love to participate. Okay, again, focusing on the strengths, which is a great thing to do. But let's not overlook the challenges, because once we overlook the challenges, we're not getting the services and supports to remediate the challenges. Okay, so these are, so just because as a parent, just because you have a child with special needs, doesn't mean you all of a sudden know how to remediate the deficit. It doesn't mean you automatically know how to address the problem. Okay, you have to I don't want you to feel bad as parents if you don't know what you're doing. Okay, it's a learning curve just like everything else. Okay, and I'm telling you this from personal experience too. My brother, who's autistic, I mentioned before, his behaviors are changing along the way. Okay, he's nonverbal unless you watch Sesame Street and then he repeats all the skits over and over again. So I can communicate with him because I know every single Sesame Street skit. But there are challenges there. He lives in a group home. He's been there since he was 21. Again, he's 49 now. He had exhibited this behavior for several years where he wouldn't go to sleep. Okay, he just would not go to sleep, and nobody could figure out why. And so we had a colleague of mine who's a behaviorist, a board-certified behavioral analyst, and those are professionals who specialize in addressing behaviors. I was talking to her one day, and I said, you know, she asked, what happens at night? Well, he's obsessed with Sesame Street toys, okay? He likes to line them up on the floor before he goes to sleep. And then he goes to sleep. Well, when he moved into the group home, he had a roommate. And for safety reasons, the staff didn't want, they said, you can play with the toys during the day, but we can't line them up at night because then if his roommate gets up in the middle of the night, he'll trip over the toys. Well, the act of bringing the toys and putting them in a bin was stressing my brother out. He has obsessive compulsive disorder, okay, which goes along sometimes with autism. So it was stressing him out, and while he's nonverbal, he couldn't sleep at night because the toys were in a bucket. So we got involved, and now he has his own bedroom in the house because he needed to line up the toys in order to address his OCD and sleep at night. Everybody's happier, including the staff, because he's now sleeping at night. He's not an easy guy. So, but the point being is that he developed that behavior over time, and I'm in this field, okay? I've been doing this for 16 years, and I had no idea. It never occurred to me that that's what would be causing him to not sleep at night. We tried medication changes, we tried everything, but we wouldn't know, okay? So the point being is that you shouldn't feel bad if you don't know. There are tons of professionals in the area and across the country that might be able to pick up on or make suggestions on how to address the challenge that you're having or your child is having. Okay? So at this point, I went through everything that this is, the challenges that school districts are telling parents or why parents are not not recognizing their child with special needs or what the needs are. And I'm going to invite Faith, as a student who's in the audience right now, to come up and talk about her experiences. You can stand right
Hey,
here.
my name's Faith Davis. I'm part of the education system. I'm diagnosed with ADHD and DMDD. From my experiences, I can't speak for anyone else because I'm not allowed to, and I don't have anyone else's lives. But So from my experiences with ADHD and DMDD, when I often tell people that I have ADHD or DMDD, they often think that that defines my IQ or how dumb or smart I am, and it's not really that way. It's ADHD and DMDD. I mean, DMDD is a mood disorder, but ADHD defines on how I learn. ADHD doesn't have anything to do with your IQ or any of that. It's how you learn. Now, since I'm also a kinesthetic learner, it's also hard for me to learn certain ways that most teachers teach. No matter how many times I try to tell a teacher, I don't learn from watching stuff on the whiteboard. I need a hands-on packet or something. They never listen, and I find it mainly frustrating because no matter how many times I tell them that, they won't listen. And most teachers, sometimes the special ed teachers I would get would often misconceive me as I'm this young and like average sixth grader IQ girl. I learn actually very fast, and it's not true that I'm stupid or anything. I think I'm more mature than an average sixth grader. What would often go was, like I said, most teachers would misconceive me as a dumb person, but it's not true because, like I said, I'm a very fast learner. And when I am, but like when I say that, they don't listen because they reteach me the thing over and over again for this whole year. For the whole year, I'd be taught the same things over and over again, and it just gets so frustrating. And when I zone out and I start doing my own thing because I already know what I'm doing and I don't need any more stuff to teach on that specific topic, and I'm ready to move on to the next topic, they would often lecture me because I was doing my own thing or wasn't paying attention. But it's not true because I'm just bored and I need something new because I'm that type of person I'm that type of adventurous, free, spirited person that loves to learn new things in life. And I think that life is just this learning, fun opportunity that you can. There's a lot of things in life that you don't know, and that's what makes it fun, the mysteries. But like with ADHD, most people don't understand that. They don't, or people with learning disabilities just are often misconceived in general because people just don't understand that learning disabilities don't have anything to do with your IQ. They really don't. It really just depends on how you learn. And what's sad is that the school system often just can't understand that, or people in general, and it makes me upset, and it makes me wonder why are we treated like this? We, no matter what, of color, race, religion, etc., we all bleed red. We all bleed blood. We are the same human. We are humans with feelings. Our brain just works differently.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you, Faith, for doing that. That must have been really hard, but I really commend you. That was a really great representation of your personal experiences. So let me talk to you about the barriers to getting the services. People are ignoring or do not understand Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. They're not aware or they don't have the knowledge of the disability, what the impact of the disability has, and the remedies to address the disability. There's inadequate medical care, to address the challenges that Jody Bauer will be talking about after my presentation today. Districts claim that they don't have the money. I'll disagree with that, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Challenge is getting the right curriculum into the classroom. This morning, one of the members of the audience talked about how the teachers are not trained. And the teachers are not, the districts don't pay for the teachers to get trained. So they don't have the knowledge of the disabilities. Okay, so getting the right curriculum and training into the classroom. Staff are often not trained properly. I will tell you, this is an issue across the country, and from personal experience with the Rogish case, it's definitely a challenge in the Clark County School District. For those of you who don't know, with OR, the student in this matter, in the Rogish matter, Lori's daughter, Lori talked about it a little bit before, but she did have she had dyslexia as well as many other disabilities. I will be totally frank with you in that when Lori first came to me with the challenges that she was having with the school district, I didn't believe her. Sorry, Lori. I didn't believe her. I was like, there's no way that this could actually be happening in a school district. I think she's probably misunderstanding something. Well, don't you know, I participated in a few IEP meetings following that, and I realized that Lori was actually telling the truth. The meetings where she was given the wrong address of the IEP meeting. And then when we went into the meeting and we started asking for services, the district simply said no. And I will say, this isn't a matter of wealth versus poor, or like wealthy versus poor or money. The district, I'm sorry, I hope you don't mind me saying this, I think it was in the decision, Lori and SIG offered to pay for 11 teachers to get trained in Orton-Gillingham instruction. So the district actually would have made a profit on what they were offering. Let me say that again. Lori and SIG offered to pay to have 11 teachers to get trained in the structured literacy approach so their daughter could attend the Clark County School District. It would not only have benefited their daughter, but it would also have benefited several other people. Okay, in my calculation, if one teacher gets certified in a structured literacy intervention, they can impact 44 kids an hour. Okay? Because they can utilize a turnkey approach. So the structured literacy teachers can oversee other teachers who are training. They can impact 44 kids an hour. Okay, and the district said no. So Lori and SIG paid to have 11 teachers to get trained in a private school in the approach. Okay, and their child went there, and then we sought reimbursement for the services that the district should have been providing all along. So this wasn't a question of money. They can't blame money. This wasn't a question of that it was too difficult. It was handed to the district, okay, and they said no. Okay, so the problem with not only the challenges that the Rogish family had, but the challenges that students with special needs across the country are having is that the way the districts are handling the IDEA in Section 504 is that students with special needs are always playing catch up. Okay, always playing catch up, and so are the teachers. It's costing the districts more money. Okay, we know that because for the example that I used earlier this morning, I have a client who was in kindergarten and they exhibited signs of dyslexia. Not just signs, she was evaluated and it came out there was a 51-point discrepancy between her IQ and achievement, her basic reading skills. What does that mean? It means that she has the potential. Okay, she's an average IQ. She had the potential of making progress just like everyone else with the proper instruction. Okay, and the 51-point discrepancy between her IQ and her basic reading skills meant something was off. She had the potential, she had an average IQ, yet she wasn't making progress. Okay, but with the proper, we know this, we have the research, with a structured literacy intervention, she could catch up, and especially at the younger grades. But as the students get older, Their ability, especially for a student with dyslexia, but other disabilities as well, it gets harder to remediate the deficit. Why? Just like we're all adults. I mean, I've never been called an adult, but we'll pretend for the sake of this conversation that I am. We know that we're all adults. The older we get, we're more stuck in our ways. Why is it different for children with special needs or children? Okay, the older we get, the more we get more stuck in our ways. It will be harder to remediate the deficits. On top of that, as the students get older, you heard Tracy talk about this morning, the focus is different. So in kindergarten through third grade, everybody's learning to read. Okay, everybody's learning to communicate. But around fourth grade, the focus shifts. We know this from the Common Core or core curriculum content standards that apply across the country. Okay, the focus shifts. We're no longer learning to read. We're no longer learning to communicate. We're reading to learn at this point. And then if the student with special needs, like dyslexia or autism or other disabilities, if they don't learn early on, now in fourth grade, they're learning to read and they have to read to learn all at the same time. Okay? I had a client, I just finished a hearing on Tuesday in Pennsylvania where, again, the student was dyslexic. The district completely missed the boat for the first 4 years. During COVID, a teacher who was certified Norton Gillingham went to my client's house in the morning, an hour each morning, to help her and utilizing the structured literacy approach with her. Okay, commend the teacher. That was great. Okay, it was really nice of her to do. She volunteered to do it. And the student did make progress, but the district didn't implement didn't have anybody in the school for later in the day to help reinforce the instruction all along. So her progress was minimal. Okay, but that said, the attorney for the district said, "Isn't that wonderful? I mean, it's amazing." The teacher volunteered to go to the student's home before the school day started an hour each day. Why are you not grateful? Why are you suing us? My redirect, again, I don't even consider this to be sarcasm. It was pretty straightforward. Do you think that the student was so grateful that she had to have an hour more of instruction each day because you missed the boat? I mean, and the teacher said, "I don't know what the student was thinking." Well, I think we can all appreciate that students don't want to be in school longer than they have to. But her day had to be extended because the district missed the boat. She missed out on the early morning activities that other students had access to because the district missed the boat. And I'm not claiming that every district does this. I'm not claiming that all professionals, there are no professionals in the schools who want to help or who do help. But when they miss it, they really miss the boat, and it causes a lot of challenges later on. So as a result, we're always playing catch up. Okay? Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act is an anti-discrimination. Let me try that again. It's an anti-discrimination statute that says, versus the IDEA, which is an entitlement statute. Section 504 is an anti-discrimination statute. It is a broad statute that was written in 1970 and passed in 1973 that talks about that no other qualified individual shall be excluded from or denied the participation of or subject to discrimination of any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. That applies to school districts. Schools, they do receive federal financial assistance. Section 504 applies. I don't care if your child has an IEP, okay? If your child has a 504 plan or an IEP, they are subject to the protections of Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Okay, if a student is not getting equal access to their education, they are being discriminated against under Section 504. Okay, so what we argued in the Rogish case, and we've been arguing ever since, is that if the children across the board are entitled to research-based programs to the maximum extent possible, okay? For a student with dyslexia, and I'll go to other disabilities in a few minutes, for a student with dyslexia, we know that students with dyslexia require structured literacy interventions delivered with fidelity in order to access and benefit from their education. There is not one body of research that says otherwise. Yet, districts implement a balanced literacy approach as opposed to a structured literacy approach for the first 3 years. And I'm going to give you examples of balanced literacy approach. Read 180, Fountas and Pinnell. There are others as well, but those are just some examples. Okay, excuse me. And those programs they're not bad programs. There's just no research to support that it's effective for students with dyslexia, who require the structured literacy approach in order to access and benefit from their education. Okay, but because it is the school districts they think that it will probably be remediated, they say, try this approach first, and then if it still doesn't work, maybe we'll implement the other approach. So we argued that it was discrimination under Section 504 to refuse to implement the structured literacy approach. We've done the same thing with autism. There's a ton of research that says students with autism learn using applied behavioral analysis, okay, which is otherwise known as ABA. Some districts say, well, it takes techniques of ABA, but we're not going to say it's an ABA program. That's a problem because now you're denying a student the ability to learn. Okay, you're denying the student the ability to learn because they don't recognize the significance of implementing this, utilizing these methodologies. Again, that's not acceptable. That's discrimination because then what happens? The students grow up, they don't have the communication skills, they don't have the emotional skills, okay? They don't have the reading skills in order to move forward independently and successfully in their lives. They become reliant on other people. So what you will hear if you do, or read, I should say, if you do a Google search, is that Section 504 is just an accommodation statute. Okay, you're entitled to maybe extended time, an extra set of books, maybe a reader or a scribe. That's not actually, those are true. You are entitled to those accommodations when necessary. But these are provisions that are straight out of Section 504. Okay, they must make reasonable accommodations or modifications to policies, practices, or procedures if necessary to avoid discrimination. So when you hear districts say, or anybody say to you, we don't offer that here, a red flag should go up. And by the way, I have the red flags listed on a slide at the end of the presentation. So a red flag should go up. Okay, we don't offer that here. Again, in the roguish case, we were told, you're not entitled to dictate methodologies. And we couldn't agree more, unless a student requires it in order to access and benefit from their education, which was the case here. Did I just mumble? I'm kidding. Oh, I'm sorry, Starbucks, thank you. I drank it right before. So the district said, you're not entitled to dictate methodologies, okay? And we said, I couldn't agree more, unless, there's a comma, right? Unless the student requires the methodology in order to access and benefit from their education. Okay, access and benefit from their education. That's after the provision that says parents can't dictate methodologies. Okay, there's a comma, end. Okay, so that is something that, and in dyslexia cases, learning disabilities, and autism cases, this is what we know. Okay, so we know that they require structured literacy interventions or maybe applied behavioral analysis in order to access and benefit from their education. That said, if a district can come back, if I'm asking for, asking for Orton Gillingham, and the district says, no, we don't do that here, okay, that's okay. But my follow-up, which I did in the roguish case as well, is that's fine, but what do you offer? How are you going to give my child equal access to his or her educational program? Okay, and if the district comes back and offers something that can provide equal access, great. That's not what happened in the roguish case, and that's not what happens with several of my other cases. They just, in the roguish case, we don't know, and you're not entitled to dictate, so you'll just have to trust us. Okay? That's a problem. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This is the law that primarily governs special education, but in order, I like to marry the two laws for the sake of this presentation. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act is a broad statute, okay? It's bright line. Is your child receiving equal access to their educational program as the neurotypically developing population? The IDEA is also a federal statute. It funds the services. Okay, but it's a way of enforcing Section 504. It was written after Section 504, and it is a way of enforcing Section 504. But for students who require specially designed instruction in order to access and benefit from their education. Okay? The IDEA says the purpose of it is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free and appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. That's the function of the IDEA. That's the purpose of it. Okay? And school districts are given money to do that. So we're talking about the children's unique needs. Okay, we're talking about what skills do individuals need in order to be prepared for further education, employment, and independent living. I'm going to list a few. They need social skills. Okay, they have emotional needs. They need to be addressed, especially now after COVID or during COVID. They have behavioral needs sometimes. Okay, they're not just reading, writing, and math, but they have other needs as well that also need to be addressed. So school districts have an obligation to not just address academic needs, but they have an obligation to address social development, emotional development, and functional life skills that include behaviors. Okay? So, and they get money to do that under the IDEA. Did I skip one? Okay, sorry, the transitions. Okay, so we all know what free means, right? Okay, you're not paying for a service. So all students are entitled to a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. Free, you're not paying for it. Appropriate is the term that lawyers argue about, because every law has an ambiguous term to give lawyers something to argue about. Okay, appropriate is that term under these circumstances. You have public, which is at public expense, and you have education, learning. Okay, so what is appropriate? Appropriate is that the Supreme Court said in the Andrew F. decision, to make it very clear, that a school must offer an IEP that is reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. Everybody now knows what appropriate means, right? I'm being sarcastic. Okay, it's appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. So what does that mean? Okay, I've gone over it in detail up until now, but you look at the child's individual needs. You don't look at the child as a class. If you've met one child with autism, you've met one child with autism. Okay, if you've met students with dyslexia, yes, they all have similar needs. They all have a phonologically processing deficit, okay, that impacts their ability to learn. So you have to have some checklists, but the gravity of which certain challenges exist for different students varies. Okay, some students who have dyslexia have better comprehension skills than others. They all have, the general profile is that they have high listening comprehension skills and poor reading skills. Okay, listening because they're forced to listen. There's nothing wrong with their hearing. And they can process, and they have an average IQ at a minimum, so they can understand the material. They just can't read it. Okay, or they might be able to encode and decode, but it might be slower. Okay, I'm just giving some examples, but the profile of the student varies from student to student. Okay, so what a child needs will vary from student to student. So to say that the student should go in the autism class and their needs will be met, I'm not so sure that that's the case. It could, certainly could, but not necessarily. If a student has a learning disability, maybe it's appropriate for them to go into a language and learning-based disabilities class. Maybe it's not. Again, it depends on the needs of the student. If a child has emotional challenges, if they have depression, if they have behavioral challenges, if they're bipolar, it doesn't mean they need to go into a class that's for students who need emotional regulation. It impacts them in different ways. Okay? It doesn't. So the point being is that to classify somebody and with their disability and say this is everything that the child is going to need is most likely false, and a red flag should go up. Any questions so far, by the way? Yes.
Okay, so this is what I've seen before. Every IEP should be adjusted with some modification to that individual. What I'm seeing is a blank IEP that is adjusted for the whole school. Everybody has the same freaking IEP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when a child, the question was the challenge is that all students have the same blanket IEP. Well, in your advocacy efforts, that's when you can ask about how's my child's IEP different from somebody else's. Okay, how is this strategy going to help my child? Okay, my favorite, I have tons of favorites, quite honestly, but one favorite is that a child who has school refusal and the district offers support in the school building. Think about it. Okay, if they can't get to school, how are they going to access the supports? And then the parents are going to be told, well, if they come to school, they'll get the instruction. Well, if they could come to school, they wouldn't need the instruction in that particular case, right? I'm laughing at the absurdity of it. And this happens all across the country. Okay, so I'm giving you all of this foundational knowledge to start thinking about how to advocate for your child. Okay, we'll get into more detail, but these are things that you want to think about when advocating for your child, instead of just accepting that this is the way it is. Okay. Yes, districts have to go to the home or find somebody who can go to the home if the child is not able to access their education. Okay, so it's not just limited to the school building. Okay, there's a ton of case law out there that says that the student has to be able to generalize their skills across environments in order to receive a free and appropriate public education. Okay, they're not going to become more independent if their skills are limited to a certain environment, right? So there's tons of case law out there. So to that point, when everybody is getting the same blanket IEP, that's a problem. Another favorite example, if I may. I had a situation where a school district cut occupational therapy for 10 families. I happen to represent all 10 families. So I may have noticed a trend. So in that case, I didn't have to necessarily sue the school district. I just filed a complaint with the Department of Education because the district took the same approach for all 10 families. Okay, the district's position, and I understood it, was we're going to try to reduce the services and hope that the parents will go to their insurance company to pay for the OT. Okay, and it could be a reasonable approach to take, but that requires a conversation with the parents. Don't just cut the services and hope that happens, because the student is the one that suffers. Okay, and they couldn't, none of them, once they realized that I represented all of the families, they couldn't say that it was individualized, right? So, I mean, they quickly got the services back, but that was actually, quite honestly, they didn't stop the services because we filed a petition for what's called stay put or pendency. And what that means is when a district tries to change a program against your wishes, you file a petition for due process or a complaint for due process before that IEP goes into effect. And if you do that, the district cannot change the student's program until the dispute is resolved, either through a settlement agreement or a hearing. Yes. Stay put or pendency. Stay put or pendency. And anybody can go back and complain to Starbucks if I'm talking too fast. It's not my fault. Yep. Yeah, but that's later on. The question was, can I explain the complaint process? And I will do that at the end, okay? Or midway through. Okay, so how do you become eligible for the services or under the IDEA or Section 504? For the IDEA, you have to have a disability. That disability has to adversely the child's ability to learn, either through academics, social skills, emotional development, or functional life skills. And they have to require specially designed instruction in order to benefit from their education. Okay, so the disability can be anywhere from autism to dyslexia to traumatic brain injury to, I'm giving a ton of examples, depression, anxiety, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, a brain injury. Sometimes it's rare, but a physical ailment. And I say rare because you don't require specially designed instruction generally for that, but you could. So I'm not going to rule that out, okay? ADHD is huge, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Sometimes they go hand in hand, okay? Obsessive compulsive disorder. So they're comorbid disabilities. Autism, OCD, and social skills challenges usually go hand in hand. Sensory needs, they go along with it. Okay, dyslexia and ADHD often go hand in hand. Okay, so the point being is that you have to have a disability, and no, it doesn't always require a diagnosis from a medical professional. Okay, it could. I mean, you could get a diagnosis, but it doesn't always require one. Yes.
Would you consider brain fog or late effects of chemotherapy in line with disability?
The question was, would I consider brain fog? That's a good question. A brain fog, or the side effects of chemotherapy, or now COVID, a disability. And the answer is maybe. It depends, because again, every lawyer starts out with it depends. The answer, it depends. The reason that I say that is because it depends on the impact and what the student requires in order to make progress in their educational program. If the student requires a certain type of instruction to address it, and for the ramifications of COVID, I don't think we have the research there yet for it, but for chemo, I'm sure we do. But if they require specially designed instruction that's different, then yes. Okay, if they don't require and they might require just extended time or an accommodation, no. Okay. But that said, see, I argue with myself. I always win when I argue with myself, so it's great. But that said, under Section 504, you can also get special education. So I'm not going to say that the child absolutely requires an IEP in order to get the right services. It might be that they get the special education services under Section 504 if that's necessary to equal the playing field. Yeah. I'm sorry? Great. Yep. Yep. So colleges are, the comment was the colleges are giving Section 504 to address brain fog. I would absolutely agree to that, with that. At a minimum, they would get a 504 plan, if not an IEP. But in colleges, you don't get IEPs, you only get 504 plans. So that, but the good news is that they are providing the accommodations to address that. Okay. So the IDEA, so you have the disability, it has to adversely impact their ability to learn, and they require specially designed instruction. Another favorite, because I just have a lot of them, is that autism. The student is classified as under the autism category, which means they have a social deficit that's impacting their ability to learn. And then I see an IEP that doesn't have any speech and language instruction to address the social skills challenges, because the child doesn't need it. Think about it. The district admitted, or they acknowledged, I should say, that the student has a social skills challenge that's impacting their ability to learn, but they don't require speech and language to address the social skills challenge. That's not accurate. There's a problem with that. Okay, but I'm just giving different examples. You want me to slow down again? Jeez, you're very demanding here. And then she couldn't keep up with me. And then when I said we rest, she goes, shh. Sorry about that. So, whoops, I'm from New Jersey. So under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, that the student has to have a disability that substantially limits a major life activity. Okay, or they're regarded as having a disability. That's a common issue, okay? If the student does not necessarily have the diagnosis, but the professionals can recognize that they probably do have a disability such as depression, anxiety, ADHD, then the student is protected if it substantially limits a major life activity under Section 504. Okay, they don't have to officially get the diagnosis in order to get the protections of Section 504. Something to keep in mind that is not commonly shared is that, and it seems obvious, but it's not commonly shared, is that Section 504 doesn't say you don't have an obligation to not discriminate in 60 days. Under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, when a student is referred to the child study team to be evaluated, they have in Nevada, they have 45 days to complete the evaluations, right? And determine eligibility for special education. But Section 504 doesn't say you can discriminate for the next 45 days, okay? It says you can't discriminate now. So at a minimum, districts should be providing special education and related services under the IDEA if the student knows they require it in order to access their education. Okay, that's not commonly addressed or commonly argued, but the fact of the matter is they can't discriminate now. Okay? So the next step is identifying the disability. How do you do that? So generally speaking, when a child is suspected of having a disability, they're referred to the multidisciplinary team, or in some states, the child study team, to be evaluated for special education and related services. What evaluations would they get? They're generally getting, at a minimum, a psychological evaluation, an educational evaluation, and a social history. Then on top of that, they might get a neurological evaluation, a neuropsychological evaluation, which is not really necessary if you're getting the educational and psychological. The neuropsych would be in lieu of that because the neuropsych does all of that testing together. You can get a psychiatric evaluation. Speech and language evaluation is one of my favorites, but speech and language is not just there to address articulation. Okay, it should be addressing the higher order language skills as well. So, which means expressive language, receptive language, perspective taking. Okay, and speech and language evaluations also address reading and writing. So if the evaluation is done right, they have to evaluate the team in general has to evaluate in all areas of the suspected disability. But, I'm sorry, 1 second. For a speech and language evaluation, you might want to emphasize, I want the speech and language evaluation to address the higher order language skills. Okay, so you're putting it out there. That's what needs to be evaluated. If your child doesn't have any articulation issues, you don't need to evaluate for that. You evaluate for the other pieces. Okay, you had a question? So no, they don't make you, well, what they do, I don't know. However, what they're obligated to do is evaluate in all areas of the suspected disability. Okay, so they're supposed to do it. If they don't have anybody in the district to do it, then they would pay for you to go outside to get it done.
So if you request, for example, a neuropsychic
Well, they have to give you written notice of why they're refusing that, okay? But a neuropsych is, if the team is going, they can say no and say, well, we'll do an educational and psychological evaluation. But as long as it's being addressed, you're evaluating all areas of the suspected disability. A neuropsych, what I like is that it also addresses executive functioning challenges. It also does a little bit of some, not depending on the neuropsych, some language components. And it's one person looking at all of the skills as opposed to professionals going from their unique area. So neuropsychs are great. You can pay for it privately. Some accept insurance, but I usually ask the district to do it when we don't know why the child is not making progress. Okay, so if we know from the psych and educational evaluation why they're not making progress, it might not be necessary. But if we don't know, then I say, well, that's great. I appreciate your efforts, and it's true. I do appreciate their efforts. I'm not being sarcastic there, but we would like a neuropsych to delve more deeper into the cognitive processes in order to figure out why the child isn't making progress. Did I answer your question? Yes. Okay. Yep. I can't hear you. I'm sorry. Yep. Yeah. Here's the funny thing, and laugh as much as you want because it's not really that funny. The psychiatrists. Yes, they usually don't know. Up until the pre-pandemic, I've never known of a school to have a psychiatrist on staff. Some schools around the country are starting to bring in a psychiatrist because of all the mental health challenges that the kids are facing. So that's the way it was in the past, and if they don't have anybody, then yes, they should be referring out. But the LCS social worker wouldn't do a psychiatric. Mm-mm. It's outside their domain. So a psychiatric evaluation is another one. I said speech and language. You also have the psychological evaluation is generally an IQ test, and the educational evaluation is assessing levels of academic performance, so how the student is performing with reading, writing, and math. Okay, and they're generally done together. If a child has depression or other mental health challenges, and we know that the child does not have any academic challenges, we don't really need to do a psych and an educational because it's not an area of the suspected disability. Okay, I can't say districts don't do it, but it's not necessary. Okay, to even put the child through it because there's no reason to think that there are any challenges there. That said, if some students do have challenges, then you might want to do it. Go ahead. Vision and hearing? Yeah, absolutely. These are just some examples. So again, this is none of these slides. I should use the disclaimer in the beginning. Are representative of every single need or every single method of identifying or providing services. These are just examples. ELL, English as a second language. So most likely, and I'm just a lawyer, so take it for what it's worth. But for ELL, for students who speak English as a second language, if you're not sure, then they would be evaluated by somebody who knows Spanish and English. Okay, a speech and language therapist could do it, but you have to make sure that the evaluator is familiar with the language in which the student speaks. Okay, you can't just because otherwise you will often see delays for if a student speaks as English as a second language. You will often see delays and might attribute it to just having spoken a second language, or maybe they actually do have challenges that are not related to that. But the only professionals that I'm aware of that would know that are the professionals who are familiar with the languages that the student speaks. Okay, you can't have somebody who only speaks English and then because you're pretty much guaranteed that they're going to make assumptions based on their limited area of expertise. Okay, so that's a very good question. So if they speak English as a second language, you would want to make sure that you shouldn't have to, but you just pointed out that they need to be evaluated by professionals who speak their language as well. Okay. Okay, so these are some examples. Also, deaf, blind, hard of hearing. Those should be included on this as well. I apologize that they're not. I was just, again, giving different examples, and I was just giving different examples, quite honestly. So these are some areas of disabilities that would impact your child's ability to learn, or could. And then, so we're talking about referring to the child's study team to be evaluated. Anyone can do it. A parent, a teacher, a medical professional, an advocate, anyone can refer the child to the multidisciplinary team to be evaluated for special education and related services. But if you're getting an outside professional to do it, then I would make sure that they're first of all writing the letter, okay? Second, explaining the disability, explaining how it impacts them. Okay, depending on the professional, they should also be making suggestions on recommendations on how to remediate the disability. Okay, and I say depending on the professional because you want to make sure that it's in the scope of their expertise, right? You heard before that some professionals will diagnose autism or dyslexia, but they don't necessarily know the proper remediation. Okay, so I would go to professionals who know how to remediate because the recommendations will be there for you. And then when you can bring it to the child study team, I'll go into it in a little bit more detail. You can bring it to those reports to the multidisciplinary team to be incorporated or implemented into an IEP. Okay, do you have a question? Oh, I thought you did. I'm sorry. Okay, so autism, for example. It's usually not diagnosed before 18 months. You might see signs of it, but it's usually not diagnosed. But the characteristics are poorly developed social skills, difficulty with expressive and receptive communication, and the presence of restrictive and repetitive behaviors. Okay, so these are characteristics of autism. Other possibilities, comorbid disabilities that go along with it, or traits that go along with it. Okay, it could impact them. It might not necessarily. In my experience, the students who are less severely impacted, who don't have the same level of behaviors, are often overlooked. But that doesn't mean they don't have the challenges, okay? And they need to get that instruction. Dyslexia can be diagnosed around preschool or kindergarten. It might not be, but it can. Generally speaking, they have an average or higher average IQ. They have poor reading abilities. These are some characteristics, not inclusive. Poor spelling, difficulties with sound symbol relationships. And anybody, by the way, can email me for a copy of the presentation afterwards. Because I, again, speak fast due to Starbucks. Mental health. Depression, just the examples. I'm sorry that there's no image, but depression, ADHD, bipolar, schizophrenia, dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. Characteristics, they can interfere with concentration, mood regulation, as well as many others. They could prevent a child from accessing their education because maybe they don't want to leave the school. Yes?
I have a question. When you're looking at your client and thinks that clinically is dyslexia, what test do you like to test?
I'm sorry? What
test do you like to see if you like this is my homework test?
I don't think there's any specific test. I do, in terms of, I like neuropsych. I love neuropsychs. I love speech and language assessments. The Woodcock-Johnson, the Wyatt, all great assessments. I'm sorry? The WISC-5. And so I'm looking at I rely on the experts, but we want to also make sure that it's not a test that was done within the year. Okay, so if you do the WISC-5 or a Woodcock-Johnson and you do the form, you want to know what form A, whether they're utilizing form A or form B, because you want to make sure it's not repeated the same within the year due to the practice effect, right? They've already been exposed to the questions, so it can invalidate the results of the second one. I will say the protocols don't actually say that in these assessments, but that is generally accepted in the field that you should use different forms if the same test is administered within the year. Okay, so some areas of need. Oral expression, listening comprehension, written expression, basic reading skills, reading fluency, reading comprehension, mathematics calculation, mathematics problem solving. Don't worry, there's another slide. additional areas of need that the district occasionally ignores. Social skills, executive functioning. I don't know why I hearing and visual, I apologize, but that goes along with this. Executive functioning, which are organizational skills, nonverbal cues, concentration. If a student has a nonverbal learning disability and they have difficulty recognizing nonverbal cues, the accommodation in the IEP should not be a nonverbal cue. Process. Okay. Yep.
I have a question. So this is another issue I had recently. So I have students, I have a teacher who's a TA for 3 times a week. The students I had in my CC class were given 100 minutes of general education.
Mm-hmm.
One of the days, well, every day, she would leave for like 20 minutes just to walk another student who wasn't assigned in my class to another class.
Mm-hmm.
I requested, since that was this class size is about 37 to 40 students.
Yep.
And it's a transfer school. So, long story short, I was requesting I should have her with me 5 days a week, because if she's absent or the student's absent, are they denied their minutes?
Yes.
So isn't that illegal?
Yes.
Okay, I was making sure.
Yes. And I don't answer with absolutes.
Blanket, minutes, TA, whatever they can. It has to be to that student, the individual needs.
You got it. Because if you think about it, the IEP, the Individualized Education Plan, is a contract. Okay, it's a contract that says these are the skills and services and supports a student needs in order to access and benefit from their education. And then the district doesn't comply, and they put in 100 minutes. There's 150 minutes of instruction, and they only do 100 minutes. Well, they've already acknowledged that the student requires 150 minutes, so then they're not receiving FAPE. They're not complying with the contract. Okay, so yes, so there is.
Sorry, but you have like issues like behavior,
Mhm.
language barrier. So to get that kid that one individual specific, you understand this math problem, it's so challenging.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's, you always need the extra support, especially if it's already in the IEP.
And another question, because I went on to research, is the TA required by law? I'm not sure. Are they required by law to have a separate lesson plan? Are they required to actually teach the lesson plan?
No.
Or is the general education teacher?
No, so the TA is not required to teach their own lesson plan. It will be under the supervision of the teacher, okay, to help and facilitate that. Yep. Oh, by the way, the teacher is required to be trained in the area that they're teaching. Things I never thought I'd have to say. No, the TA is support. Okay, the teacher is required to be certified in the area that they're teaching. Okay, just like if you're a doctor, you should be trained in the field that you're treating. Go ahead.
So the TA can be considered the co-teacher in that class?
Yes. What? I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
There's a difference between a TA, which is a teacher assistant,
Right.
and a CC teacher. That's a teacher specifically in the classroom to aid.
Oh, okay. Resource, in-class resource. So, thank you for that clarification.
I have a CC class, I was assigned a CC class, but the person who came and co-taught was a TA.
So in that.
You cannot have a TA teaching anything in CCSD. That is illegal.
Right. Okay, so
Are they able to be assigned to my CC class, yes or no? It has to be a
It has to be a licensed individual.
Okay, thank you for that.
That's why they moved them. That's why because I was questioning everything, this semester, they took out my CC class and I was asking too many questions.
I feel like this is obvious, but why is this important? I'm just going to let you read the slide yourself. The disabilities, these are all disabilities that will interfere with their access to education. This is why especially design instruction matters, okay? The approach matters, the training matters, the services matter, okay? Yes?
This is what I find is very funny. You guys say you have to be licensed as a teacher in the field. 95% of all private dyslexia schools do not hire and train this way. Yet the state gives them money, and then we're supposed to acknowledge this, but then let us, whoever, I mean, I did, we take money from California and other states, and none of those teachers had degrees in those areas.
Mm-hmm.
But yet we give them money.
But there are a lot of teachers who are not necessarily trained in certain areas, but with the proper instruction, then they go through the training, and then that's what the money is there for, to go for training.
A philosophy degree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but they're a hell of a reading teacher. Retrain them, come out, funds. The state gives us the money, they let that teacher teach. That's private school.
Right.
So if you receive money for services, how does it work when you try to get into a private school?
They don't.
If you used to take from Massachusetts, New York.
It's totally different. I mean, so if I hear you correctly, I'm not sure, quite honestly, if I'm understanding your question correctly, but if you're asking if the private school accepts money, they're not necessarily hiring people to get trained who are trained in the approach that they're teaching. Well,
I was at the Carroll School. We received 30% of the funding was from the state of Massachusetts. So, yes.
right. Yeah, why don't we talk about that afterwards? Because I think that's more of a debate rather than what's actually happening, or not necessarily what's actually happening. I'm sure it's happening, but it's more of a debate, as I don't think the answer is clear cut. Okay, I mean clearly it's not clear cut. Okay, so at the eligibility meeting, what are you thinking about? So by this point, your child has been referred to the multidisciplinary team to be evaluated. Okay. They've undergone all of the different any of the evaluations that everybody supposedly agreed was necessary to identify and evaluate the area of suspected disability. Okay, then they've been referred, so then you get together and you have an eligibility meeting to go over the evaluations and confirm whether the child is eligible under one of 14 categories. Okay, and if they're eligible because they have a disability. That disability adversely impacts their ability to learn, and they require specially designed instruction in order to benefit from their education. Okay, so that's if they're eligible. What are we thinking about? Can you see that? I'll read it out loud. The demands of the general education environment. So what is preventing them from accessing and making progress in the general education curriculum? You want to look at the student strengths and areas of need. That goes to least restrictive environment. Okay? Least restrictive environment, students with an IEP are entitled to a free and appropriate public education in least restrictive environment. I'm going to talk about least restrictive environment for a second. It's highly debated. What is least restrictive environment? By definition, the student should be in a classroom with neurotypically developing peers to the maximum extent appropriate. Okay, I'm going to say that again. They should be placed in the least restrictive environment, which means a classroom with neurotypically developing peers to the maximum extent appropriate. And I'm emphasizing that in case you didn't know, because I often hear, well, this is the least restrictive environment. Okay, but it might not be appropriate for that particular child. Okay, for various reasons. One, if a student has processing challenges, maybe they have ADHD, they might require a smaller environment, okay, taught at a general education pace, okay, but maybe they require an environment that has less distractions, or the environment of the room is set up that interferes with their processing, okay, so they require a smaller environment. It might be that the student benefits from a general education class with pull-out support, or pull-out instruction in math and reading, and maybe in social skills. Okay, so that's another possibility. Then it might be that they require that there's no benefit to the general education class. Okay, this is not a clear-cut answer what least restrictive environment is, but let's just say for a student who is has what was formerly known as Asperger's. Okay, they are in the general education class with peers who might be talking about things that they have no interest in. So they're only talking about, so then they don't have anyone to socialize with and practice their language skills because they don't have anyone who's interested in what they have to talk about, and they're not interested in what the other kids have to talk about. Okay, maybe their interests are just very different. So if they so that now they're being denied the practice and communication skills and turn taking, and they might even be bullied as a result of it. So is that appropriate for that particular student? I don't know. It's something to think about. Okay. So that is that's least restrictive environment. It's not clear cut that a student should be in a general education class with neurotypically developing peers. Period. It just depends on the child. Okay. You also want to look at the impact of the disability in the school setting. The example: if a student is deaf or hard of hearing, okay, and they're in a loud group environment. Okay, that's not going to be appropriate for that child, especially if they're not provided with the supports to hear the information, okay, or to learn the information. What supports are needed? You want to look at the supports that are needed to allow the student to participate in access and make progress, okay? So the next, I'm going to have to go through the next few slides very quickly because I think I'm close to out of time. So after the child is evaluated and it's determined that the child is eligible for an IEP, then you start writing the IEP. Okay, the district can draft an IEP ahead of time and share it with the parents as long as they're willing to modify it during the meeting. They can't give the final IEP before they've had an opportunity to meet with the parents and talk to them about it. Okay, so at that point, you're including information in a section called present levels of academic and functional performance. This, in my view, is the most important section of the IEP. Okay, this is where you're talking about what the child can do and cannot do. Their strengths, their weaknesses. Can they count to 10 but not to 20? Can they initiate a conversation with peers and not adults? Okay, or vice versa. Do they get anxious and crawl under a table when you're asked to form a circle? Okay, these are just some examples again, but you want to be specific here, and you really want to outline how the student is performing with respect to academic skills, social skills, emotional skills, and functional life skills. Can they cross the street by themselves? Okay, speaking to that point. So you have the present levels, where they are now. You have the goals, which are the end of the IEP, and that's where you expect them to be in a year from now. They're supposed to be measurable, designed to be mastered within 1 year. Keep in mind when you're talking about, you're supposed to know what is considered progress and what's considered mastered, okay? My favorite goal, kind of my favorite goal, but a favorite goal, is that the student will learn to cross the street 80% of the time. Wonderful. What happens in the last 20%? When they get hit by a car? Is that okay? They should learn to cross the street and look both ways before crossing the street 100% of the time. Think about what we're talking about, okay? Think about the goals. When the student, if we're going with reading, a very confusing goal that I recently saw was that the student will be able to write a 3-sentence paragraph 3 out of 4 times, and data will be collected, and mastery is 90% of the time. So in my view, and I'm very literal here, but if you're actually analyzing the goal, the student needs to learn, the mastery is learning that skill, writing 3 out of 4 sentences, 68% of the time, I think the calculations came to be, because you're doing 90% of 75. You're not doing 90% of 100. They're only required to do it 3 out of 4 times, right? So that's 75%, and then you take it and then your mastery is 90% of the 75. It's complicated, but these are things you're thinking about when reading the goals. Yes? I can't hear you, I'm sorry? How can I restate which goal? So the student would, so mastery would be considered either 100% of the time, or that the student will be able to write 3 out of 4 sentences out of 4 out of 4 times, or 9% out of 4 occasions, not 90% of 3 out of 4 opportunities. Does that make sense? Okay. So now you've identified the disability, you've identified where you want how the student is learning and their impact on their education. And then you talk about the goals, where you want them to be in a year from now. And then in between are the services and supports necessary to get them from where they are now to where you want them to be in a year from now. Okay, and that's the examples through the IEP or Section 504. There are different examples of what will help a child get to from where they are now to where they want to be in a year from now. Okay, sometimes it involves specific methodologies. Sometimes it involves organizational strategies to keep up with the demands and follow along with their education and help sometimes with writing, written expression, communication. Also pre-teaching, tutoring, pre-teaching and post-teaching. So maybe reinforcing the concept, or maybe teaching it ahead of the class so then they can follow along in the class. Behavior plans. If a student is acting out a lot and they're being removed from class, I don't know if the purpose of them acting out is to get removed from class, that's great. They've just figured out how to escape from class, right? So you want to implement a behavior plan to teach them that they'll be able to leave the class at some point, but they have to stay in now, okay? If they want your attention, if every time they act out, they get your attention, they're gonna keep on acting out, right? So there have to be behavior plans in place or strategies to teach them that. So you look at the placement, okay, and the other accommodations under 504. Again, just examples, okay? It's not limited to this, but these are other services and supports to get them from where they are now to where you want them to be. Specially designed instruction. These are more examples of services that might go into the IEP. I will say, majority of these have to do with, a lot of them have to do with autism. And I will say to you that a lot of these curriculums are based on more up-to-date research. Okay, so it's not schools are not necessarily aware, because if the teachers aren't trained, they don't know about it, of these different curriculums to help individuals with autism. Okay, so structured literacy intervention, that goes along with learning disabilities. So, but a peak curriculum, I'm certified in it, although I don't administer it. That's an assessment that's research-based for individuals with autism. It teaches skills from all the way through life skills and all the way up to calculus. Okay, specifically for individuals with autism. It does help, you can use it for kids with ADHD too, but it is really great for kids with autism across the spectrum. That's where the research is. Okay, and what it does, it identifies the area of need, and then you make sure that the student has the prerequisite skills to advance in their curriculum. And if they don't have that skill, there's a curriculum to teach, a lesson plan to teach them that skill, so then they can advance towards a particular goal. Okay, so the peak curriculum, multiple exemplar training is in lieu of what's called discrete trial, because it's not in lieu of, but it's helping students generalize their skills across environments so they don't, it's not so rote, right? Like, so if for a discrete trial, you're teaching students point to a cup 10 times, okay? By the end of it, they want to bang their head against the wall. With multiple exemplar training is teaching variations of cups, as an example. Okay, I'm not going to go into all of the rest, but these are just other research-based methodologies. It's more up-to-date research. Some of the ABA research is very outdated, but yet schools are still implementing it. So I'm just bringing this to your attention because I just think awareness is important. Related services, these are services that you can help the student get from point A to point B. Again, they should be trained. Something that nobody ever challenges for some reason is that family counseling is under the IDEA. So if your family is having trouble communicating, or it's causing behaviors or anxiety, and it's interfering with the access to education, the districts have an obligation to provide family counseling. It's one of my favorites, so if you want to challenge that. Yep. Yep. Punishment due to behaviors. A student can be removed from their environment for up to 10 days without a manifestation determination. That's not consecutive, that's cumulative, okay? So, you don't have to be suspended in order for it to count. If they're removed from class, that counts as removal, okay? And they can do it for up to 10 days without a manifestation determination, which is an assessment to determine, or it's really a question. 1 second, it's just because I'm out of time, so I'm going to keep on going. It's an assessment or questionnaire to determine whether the disability is the conduct is a manifestation of the child's disability. If it is, then they can't be expelled. You have to address the IEP, amend the IEP to address that particular need. Okay. So that is, again, these are just some little timelines. Okay, so lastly, what you're all here to maybe be interested in is challenging the IEP or the 504 plan. So when you're not satisfied with the child's program, the IEP or the 504 plan, you can request initially, independent evaluations. The first steps are always to try to work with the district. I really encourage it because nobody really wants to go through due process, okay? Except for me. but nobody else does. I like cross-exam. I don't know what to tell you. But no parent really wants to go through the due process. And so you always try to work with the district. Ask for more IEP meetings. You're entitled to, I'm sorry if there are any district people here, you're entitled to as many IEP meetings as you need throughout the year to address the child's needs, okay? And so ask for more IEP meetings. Talk about the challenges that the child is having and how it can be addressed. Okay, if the district evaluates the child and you're not satisfied with the results of the evaluation, you can ask for an independent evaluation at the district's expense. That's an evaluation that is done by somebody, an outside professional, and the district pays for it. I can't ask, and you can. Oh, you want me to repeat it? Okay, fine. So if you disagree with the evaluations that were done by the district, you can ask for an independent evaluation at the district's expense. That is an evaluation that's administered by somebody who does not work for the district, but the district pays for the evaluation. I can't hear you, I'm sorry. Okay, we'll talk about that in part 2 of this. And if the district can turn down refuse your request for independent evaluations, but they have to file for due process against you to prove that their evaluation is appropriate. Okay, and they can also limit the cost of what they're willing to pay for to what's accepted in the community. Okay, so then it's a question of is that what's accepted into the community, but that's a different conversation and outside what we can talk about today. So that's the first step, to try to bring the parties together through requests for independent evaluations. If you still can't resolve it, you've had IEP meetings, you've done independent evaluations, then you file a due process petition or due process complaint, and that's outlining all the procedural violations and substantive violations under the IDEA. So basically, why your child isn't making progress. Did they invite you to IEP meetings? Did they comply with timelines? Did you ask for something that your child needs and they rejected it? And then you also, this is very important, you also want to list if your child is being discriminated against, you also want to say that the district is also discriminating against your child under Section 504. Because if you don't do it, then then you haven't what's called exhaust your administrative remedies, then you can't bring it up later. Okay, so you file this due process petition, you have informal meetings to resolve the issues in dispute, either through a resolution session or a mediation. Again, informal meetings to resolve the issues in dispute. Okay, and if you still can't resolve it, then you'll go to a hearing before a hearing officer. Okay, I don't know if I think they're still over Zoom, right? They're done remotely? In most states, they're done remotely. Sometimes you have the option of doing it in person. Before the pandemic, it was all in person. And you sit around a conference room table and you put on witnesses. You put on your expert. You do direct and cross-examination. Anybody see Law and Order? It's nothing like that. So you're not in a hearing. You're not in some states, like in New Jersey, you're in a courtroom. In Nevada, you're around a conference room table. Okay. So you're basically outlining why your child needs what they need. The district will put on their witnesses first to say why they believe that they've offered an appropriate program. This is in some states the parents go first, but in Nevada the district goes first. They put on your witnesses, and then you put on your witnesses to say why the district was wrong, and then you get a decision by a hearing officer. You have the right to appeal that to the state review officer. Okay, and sometimes there will be additional testimony. Other times there won't. In the Rogish case, there was additional testimony. We won at the hearing level. The district appealed. It was overturned on appeal, and then we took it to district court, and we prevailed in district court. Okay, so there's testimony taken, and then you get decisions, and the district has to implement the decision, the decision of the hearing officer or the judge. Yes. The mic isn't on. You have to turn it on.
I'll try and speak up.
Okay.
So I want to go back to the resolution period, because here's what I'm finding. I work with an attorney and I've been in special ed.
Can you speak into the mic, though?
I can't see on top of it to turn on. Thank you. All right. I want to go to the resolution period. What we're finding now in Clark County is that the parents will go into the resolution meeting, everything's agreed to, and then all of a sudden the agreement will come out and there's a waiver to waive their 504 to be able to go into federal court, kind of like this blanket, it waives everything. Now, I deal a lot with autism and abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't want to waive anything because
Right.
we don't know what we might find in 2 months of something that happened. But we've had quite a few just straight FAPE cases where the districts has this little verbiage in there that has the parents waive any kind of other bringing up issues in that time period that maybe you find out later.
Right.
And it's forcing into due process for families, which of course isn't the intent of the law or resolution. So I just wonder if you're finding that across the country, or are we just finding a new way around?
No, you're not limited. It's not limited to Nevada. Sometimes, so the question was, in a resolution session, districts are saying, we'll give you what you want, or some version of what you want, but you will have to waive other rights or entitlements in order to get it. Point blank, parents cannot waive their future right to FAPE, a free and appropriate public education. Okay, that's not enforceable. Any provisions around that are not enforceable. Parents cannot waive your future right to a free and appropriate public education. But sometimes we'll see that the parents will want, maybe let's just say, an ABA provider. Okay, and the district will say, we'll provide that, but we're not going to be on the hook if your child doesn't make progress. Under those circumstances, it's not enforceable, but I understand it, because they're saying, we don't have any control. You're picking it, we'll do it in the interest of resolving it, but they can't, in the interest of resolving it, but we can't control it, so we don't believe it's necessary, so you can't sue us for it later. Okay, so under those circumstances, you can't waive your future right to FAPE. However, they would have an argument that they're not at fault. Okay, but it is common to have to waive past claims in order, because the theory being you have an obligation to raise all issues at once. Okay, and if you don't waive it, we'll give you what you want to resolve the issues, and then we're starting fresh moving forward.
So what the waiver is doing now is waiving issues you may not be aware of, but were in the time period in which you filed your due process, or from going on to federal court of that matter.
So It's common.
It is common.
Okay, it is
yeah.
common.
It's new for us to see it, so we're just kind of
Yeah, no, it's common, and parents will have the choice, and this is where we talk about it with the parents, of what they're do they have any intentions of moving forward, or do they want to just get what they need now? Because if they don't agree to it, then they have the right to not agree to it and move forward, but obviously it will delay the provision of the services. So parents will have to choose. As long as they're aware that this is something that they're giving up, then and they choose that, they'll be okay with it. If they're not comfortable with it, then you might be able to do a carve out for only known actions. You can do that, or you might. But if they don't agree, then it's a choice. You either move forward or you don't. In my experience, I will say that most of the time districts don't really push back unless there's a risk of a huge claim against them. Then they'll push back, and then we'll deal with that. All right. With that said, I'm going to bring up Jody Bauer because I went way over my time. But I hope you learned something today. Yes, Lori? Oh, good. One last point. If you are a teacher or an advocate in a school district and you are not going to, okay, I'm sorry, and you see a child's rights being violated, if you raise that, you cannot be retaliated against under Section 504. If you do, you as a teacher would have a claim against the district. Okay, so so that is something to keep in mind. If you work for a district and you raise something as a violation, if the child needs something and the district isn't providing it, the teacher can take action, and they are protected under Section 504. Okay, I'll go into the other stuff, but it'll be infused throughout Jody's presentation. Okay, which is solution-oriented process and compensatory education.